You have been at war with yourself for longer than you realize. Not a dramatic war. Not one that announces itself with crisis or collapse. Not the kind of war that other people would recognize as suffering if they looked at your life from the outside. A quiet war. The kind that runs in the background of an ordinary Tuesday. In the half-second after a small mistake, when something inside you tightens before you have even consciously registered what happened. In the way you hesitate before sharing an idea. Not because the idea is wrong, but because part of you is already preparing for the verdict before the words have left your mouth. In the way you replay a conversation at 11 at night, not because anything catastrophic occurred, but because there was one moment in it that could have been better, and that one moment is now receiving the full weight of your analytical attention. You have learned to call this conscientiousness. You have learned to call it high standards. You have learned, somewhere along the way, to mistake the sound of that internal monitor for the voice of your own wisdom. It is not your wisdom. And today, that war ends. I am Saint Germain, keeper of the violet flame, Chohan of the seventh ray of freedom, transmutation and divine alchemy. I do not come to you today with another practice to add to the list of things you are not doing consistently enough. I do not come to invite you into more effort, more discipline, more rigorous self-examination. I come with the one understanding that, once genuinely received, not just intellectually accepted but actually landed in the nervous system, makes the war impossible to continue. What I am about to transmit is not theory. It is not the kind of spiritual teaching that sounds profound in the moment and then evaporates when you return to the texture of your actual daily life. It is a specific alchemical mechanism, precise, testable, and immediately applicable, that dissolves the architecture of self-judgment at the level where it was originally built. Not through more effort, not through more willpower applied against the pattern. Through something that your nervous system has almost forgotten is possible, because it has been so long since you experienced it in the context of your own inner relationship. There is a reason this transmission found you today and not 6 months ago, and not 6 months from now. Your inner world has reached the precise threshold at which this frequency can be received. Below that threshold, these words would have been interesting but abstract. At this threshold, they will change something that has been unchanged for a very long time. I am holding one question open, a question I will not close until the final minutes of this transmission. What becomes available to you when the war stops? Not what you will feel, not what your relationships will look like, what actually becomes possible. The specific capacities and expressions and forms of aliveness that are not currently accessible because the energy required for them is permanently occupied elsewhere. Stay with every word of what follows. What I am about to share has not been transmitted in this form before. Do not look away now. It began in the earliest years of this lifetime, in the specific and unrepeatable way that love was offered to you by the people who were responsible for your formation. Not maliciously, not cruelly, in most cases, not even consciously, but conditionally. The version of you that performed well-received warmth. The version that behaved correctly, that met the expectation, that succeeded at the task. That version was welcomed, celebrated, held. And the version that stumbled, that confused things, that fell short of the standard that was being held, consciously or not, by the adults in your environment. That version received something cooler, something that communicated, without anyone intending it as a message, that full belonging was not unconditional, that it had a price, and that the price was performance. Your nervous system, which at that age was not yet sophisticated enough to hold the complexity of separating a message from its messenger, installed this as a permanent operating principle, not as a belief you could consciously examine and choose to revise, as a survival mechanism. A fundamental instruction running below the level of conscious thought about how reality works and what you must do to remain safe and loved within it. From that installation forward, you have been doing two things simultaneously every single day of your life: living your life and running an invisible quality control process on the version of yourself who is living it. The exhaustion you feel, the specific kind that sleep does not fully cure, that rest does not fully resolve, that arrives not from overwork, but from something more pervasive, is not physical. It is the exhaustion of a being who has been working two full-time jobs since childhood. One visible, one entirely invisible. One that the world sees and rewards and sometimes celebrates, and one that no one else sees at all. The continuous, relentless, never clocking out work of monitoring, assessing, reviewing, and adjusting the self against a standard that was set before you were old enough to have any say in whether you accepted it. Now here is the piece that most spiritual teachings have stopped just short of saying with enough precision to be genuinely useful. The inner critic is not your enemy. It is not a flaw in your character. It is not evidence that you are broken, or behind, or less evolved than others who seem to move through the world with more ease and less self-doubt. It is not a problem to be solved, a demon to be exorcised, or a weakness to be overcome. The inner critic is a protection that was installed at a time when you were genuinely vulnerable, when you genuinely needed a mechanism for monitoring your behavior to avoid the withdrawal of love, when the consequences of getting it wrong felt, to a young nervous system without the resources to hold that kind of uncertainty, genuinely threatening. It was, at the time of its installation, an act of intelligent self-preservation. It was the psyche doing exactly what a healthy psyche does when it is young and dependent and learning how the world works. It created a system. It built a mechanism. It installed an internal guardian to make sure you did not make the mistake of being too fully yourself at the wrong moment, with the wrong people, in conditions where that fullness might cost you something you could not afford to lose. That mechanism has simply never been updated. It is running the same software that a young being installed to stay safe in conditions that no longer exist, for a version of reality that no longer applies, in service of a threat that is no longer present in the form it once was. And the software does not know that the conditions have changed, because software does not have the capacity to notice the passage of time. It only knows how to run the program it was given. It runs the program when you make a mistake. It runs the program when you fall short. It runs the program when you are tired and your defenses are down. It runs the program when you are doing something new and unfamiliar, and the outcome is uncertain. It runs the program because that is what it was built to do. This is why arguing with the inner critic does not work. This is why trying to override it with affirmations or positive self-talk does not work. This is why years, sometimes decades, of sincere, committed, intelligent spiritual practice can leave the fundamental architecture of self-judgment essentially intact, even as everything else in your life and your consciousness shifts, and expands and deepens. You cannot update a protection mechanism by attacking it. You cannot convince a guard to stand down by fighting the guard. You can only update it by providing consistent, accumulated, undeniable evidence that safety is now possible without it, that the conditions have changed, that the threat it was installed to protect against is no longer present in the form that required this particular defense. And that is precisely, with surgical seventh-ray precision, what the violet flame is designed to do. But the part that most transmissions never reach, the part that changes the root and not just the surface, is still ahead. Do not leave now. The question that most people ask at this point, and I want to address it directly before moving forward, is, if the inner critic is just a misguided protection, why does it feel so much like my own voice? Why does it feel like the truth when it speaks? Why does it carry what feels like moral authority? Why, when it delivers its verdicts, do I feel not like I am being attacked from outside, but like I am seeing myself clearly for the first time? The answer is this. The inner critic was installed by your own nervous system. It is not an external voice you borrowed from someone else. It is a structure your own psyche built, using materials it found in its environment to solve a problem it genuinely needed to solve. It speaks in your own internal register, in the cadence and vocabulary and logic of your own mind, because it is your own mind, at one of its earlier and less sophisticated developmental stages, doing its best to keep you safe. This is also why it is so convincing. It does not feel like an attacker. It feels like a trusted inner advisor. And the trust you have given it, the decades of treating its verdicts as reliable assessments of your worth, is not stupidity or weakness. It is the natural result of having grown up with this voice as a constant and apparently authoritative presence in your inner life. You trusted it because you built it, and you built it because you needed it. The work of the seventh ray is not to revoke that trust through an act of will. It is to gradually, consistently, patiently, moment by moment, extend your trust to something larger, to a ground of inner safety that does not depend on performance, to the lived, felt, moment-to-moment experience of being on your own side regardless of how the moment goes. If you have stayed with this transmission until now, you are ready for what follows. What comes next is the understanding that makes the practice actually work. The violet flame does not work the way your traditions have described transformation. Your traditions have taught broadly that change requires effort, that growth requires struggle, that the parts of yourself you wish to transform must be identified with clear seeing, confronted without flinching, worked through with dedication, and overcome through sustained application of will and intention. There is a level of truth in this teaching. For certain kinds of patterns, at certain stages of development, in certain conditions, this approach moves energy. It has its place and its proper season, but the wound of self-judgment belongs to a fundamentally different category. And applying the overcome through effort approach to it does not work. Not because you are not trying hard enough, not because you lack spiritual discipline or sincere desire for change, but because the approach is structurally incompatible with the problem it is being applied to. Self-judgment cannot be healed through more judgment, even judgment directed at the judging itself. Even very sophisticated, spiritually refined, well-intentioned judgment about how the self-judgment is getting in the way. When you try to overcome your inner critic by criticizing it, by labeling it as ego, by commanding it to be quiet, by shaming yourself for having it, as though its presence is evidence of insufficient spiritual development, you are using the same tool that built the problem to try to dismantle the problem. The critic observes this, and it adapts. It goes underground. It learns to wear different clothes. It disguises itself as discernment, as rigorous self-honesty, as the serious spiritual seeker's necessary willingness to see themselves clearly without the comfort of self-deception. It does not disappear through this kind of effort. It becomes more sophisticated, more convincing, more difficult to identify as what it actually is. There is a particular cruelty in this sophistication that deserves to be named clearly. When the inner critic is crude and obvious, when it sounds like a harsh external voice delivering blunt verdicts, it is at least identifiable. You can recognize it as criticism. You can notice it happening. You have at least the theoretical option of choosing not to believe it. But the sophisticated inner critic does not sound like criticism. It sounds like clarity. It sounds like the kind of unflinching self-honesty that serious, self-aware people apply to themselves when they genuinely want to grow. It sounds like the difference between someone willing to see themselves clearly and someone engaged in comfortable self-deception. This is the most insidious stage of the inner critic's evolution. When it has successfully disguised itself as your most rigorous and reliable inner voice, when the harshness has been repackaged as discernment, and the judgment has been reframed as high standards. The likelihood of recognizing it as a wound rather than as wisdom becomes very low. I have witnessed this pattern across many souls on the path of conscious evolution. The ones who struggle longest with the architecture of self-judgment are very often not the ones who lack awareness. They are frequently the most aware, the most reflective, the most committed to their own growth, and their very commitment to growth, their genuine desire to see themselves clearly and improve consistently, has become the primary vehicle for the critic's most sophisticated disguise. They believe they are practicing honest self-assessment. They are practicing the most evolved form of the original wound. This is why recognition alone is insufficient. Knowing intellectually that the inner critic is a protection mechanism installed in childhood does not, in most cases, change the lived experience of being subjected to its verdicts. Understanding the origin does not dissolve the structure. Insight is valuable. It is a beginning, and it has its place. But the architecture of self-judgment does not live in your intellectual understanding. It lives in your nervous system's automatic responses, in the tightening that arrives before the thought, in the contraction that precedes any conscious analysis of what is happening, in the body before the mind has formed a single sentence about what occurred. To reach the level where the architecture actually lives requires working at exactly the level where the architecture actually lives, which is precisely with the precision that is the signature of the seventh ray, where the violet flame works. Not at the level of understanding, at the level of moment-to-moment nervous system experience. In the 2 seconds after something goes wrong, before your mind has organized itself into language about what occurred. In the tightening, in the contraction, in the body's first response, before interpretation has had a chance to shape it. That is where the alchemy happens. The violet flame operates on a completely different principle. It does not overcome, it transmutes. These two words are not interchangeable. The difference between them is not semantic. It is the difference between an approach that fights the pattern and an approach that changes the conditions in which the pattern can exist. To overcome something is to apply force against it until it yields, to be stronger than it, to win. The inner critic, approached through the overcome model, always outlasts your willpower, because willpower is a finite resource, and the inner critic is a structural feature of your nervous system that runs automatically, without requiring energy or intention, whether you are paying attention to it or not. To transmute something is to provide the specific conditions in which it can no longer maintain its previous form, not through force, through precision. Fire does not overcome wood by being stronger than wood. It transmutes wood by creating the precise energetic conditions in which wood's existing structure can no longer hold. The wood does not fight and lose. The wood becomes something else, releases what it was, and in that release, becomes available for something it could not be before. The violet flame transmutes the inner critic not by fighting it, not by shaming it, not by commanding it into silence, but by flooding your inner environment with a frequency in which self-judgment cannot sustain itself. That frequency has a specific name in the language of the seventh ray: unconditional presence. I want to be precise about what this means, because the phrase has been used in enough spiritual contexts that it has begun to accumulate a vagueness that makes it nearly useless in practice. Unconditional presence does not mean unconditional approval. It does not mean pretending that every thought you have is equally wise, every action you take is equally skillful. Every choice you make is equally aligned with your values and your deepest knowing. It means this, and only this: your willingness to remain present with yourself, to stay in your own company, to keep your own inner attention turned toward yourself with warmth, rather than away from yourself in disgust, or turned against yourself in judgment. Does not change based on how you perform in any given moment. It means the relationship you have with yourself is not a performance-based relationship. You do not withdraw from yourself when you stumble. You do not put yourself on ice until you have demonstrated sufficient remorse or sufficient improvement. You do not treat your own inner life as a space you must earn the right to inhabit through achievement. You are here, with yourself, unconditionally, in the moments that feel good and in the moments that do not. In the moments of clarity and the moments of confusion, in the moments of grace and the moments of clumsy, entirely human, falling short. This is the frequency the violet flame works through, and this is the frequency the inner critic cannot survive in, not because it has been defeated, but because the conditions that made it necessary no longer apply. What comes in the next minutes is the specific knowledge that will determine which experience you have of everything else in this transmission. This is where it becomes practical. Here is what this looks like in a specific moment you will recognize. You say something in a conversation that lands wrong. You feel the immediate tightening in your chest, that small contraction that arrives faster than thought, faster than analysis, in the body before the mind has formed a sentence about what just happened. The replay begins. What you should have said, what they must have thought, what this reveals about you as a communicator, as a person, as someone who has apparently not yet resolved the thing you thought you had resolved. The verdict is forming. In every previous version of this moment, you've had two options available to you, and both of them fed the war. Option 1, comply with the verdict. Accept it as accurate. Use it as motivation to do better next time. Thank the critic, essentially, for keeping your standards high. Option 2, resist the verdict. Argue back. Tell yourself the other person was misinterpreting, or the context was difficult, or the standard the critic is applying is unreasonable. Both of these responses treat the critic as an authority whose verdicts deserve engagement. Both of them keep the war going, whether through surrender or through combat. The violet flame practice introduces a third option. You stop. You place one hand on the center of your chest, physically, actually, with the weight of your hand resting there, and you speak one sentence inwardly, not to the other person, not to the mistake, not to the critic itself, to the part of your inner world that is tightening around the verdict right now, in this moment, in this body. The sentence is, I am here with you, and you are not alone in this. Not as a philosophical statement about the nature of the self, not as an affirmation you are hoping will override the critic's authority if you say it convincingly enough. As a promise, your own presence offered to yourself with the full weight of a conscious decision that in this moment, this specific, ordinary, imperfect moment, you are choosing to remain in your own company rather than to withdraw from yourself into judgment. The final piece, the specific daily practice that makes everything else in this transmission actionable, arrives now. 3 practices, specific, daily, beginning today. Practice 1, the moment practice. Every time the inner critic activates, and you will recognize it by the tightening in the chest, by the replay beginning, by the verdict forming. Stop. Do not analyze why it activated. Do not try to determine whether the criticism is fair or unfair. Do not attempt to process the underlying wound or trace it back to its origin. Simply stop. Place your hand on your chest. Speak inwardly, I am here with you. You are not alone in this. That is the entire practice. Nothing more is required in that moment. No processing, no understanding, no spiritual work beyond the single act of remaining present with yourself at the precise moment the old pattern is telling you to withdraw. Do this every time, not once a day at a designated practice time. Every single time the activation occurs, regardless of where you are, regardless of what else is happening, regardless of how small or how significant the trigger. 3 times a day, 7 times, 20 times, it does not matter. Every activation is an opportunity. Every moment you choose presence over verdict is one more piece of evidence delivered to the part of your inner world that has been waiting for years, perhaps for lifetimes, for proof that it is safe to let the old protection go. The protection will not dissolve in a single moment. It will dissolve through accumulation, through the slow, patient, consistent weight of evidence that the conditions have changed. Practice 2, the morning calibration. Before you look at your phone, before you check your messages or your calendar, or the list of things that require your attention today, before the world has given you anything to succeed or fail at. 30 seconds. Hand on your chest. One sentence spoken inwardly or aloud, as a decision made before the day has had any opportunity to test it. Today I am on my own side, not as an affirmation, not as positive self-talk designed to override a negative state, as a declaration of alliance. A conscious choice, made in the quiet of the morning before the noise begins, about whose team you are on when the day gets difficult. You will forget this practice on some mornings. The critic will note this and use it as evidence. When that happens, the moment practice applies, hand on chest, I am here with you. You are not alone in this. Spoken to the part of you that forgot the morning calibration and is now being evaluated for that forgetting. The practice is recursive. It applies to every failure of the practice itself. There is no version of this work in which you can fail sufficiently to be exempt from the next moment of presence. Practice 3, the evening release, 2 minutes, before sleep. Gather the day, all of it. Not the edited version, not the version you would present to someone you wanted to impress. Not the version filtered through the question of whether it reflects well or poorly on you. The actual day, the moments that felt aligned and the moments that did not. The interactions that felt complete and the ones still carrying unresolved weight in your chest. The places where you showed up well beyond what you expected of yourself, and the places where you fell short of what you know you are capable of. Hold all of it, without immediately beginning to sort it into evidence for or against your worth. Then speak this, inwardly or aloud. Today was enough. I was enough. Whatever I am still becoming does not diminish what I already am. And then, release the day's account. Not by pretending it did not happen, not by bypassing the genuine weight of the moments that need to be learned from, but by deliberately refusing to carry them forward as ammunition. By ending the day's account before the critic can compile the summary, draw the conclusions, and present them as a permanent record of who you are. A being who ends each day at peace with itself wakes each morning with access to its full creative capacity, the full range of its intelligence, its expression, its capacity for genuine presence in relationship and in work. A being who ends each day in judgment of itself wakes each morning already carrying the previous day's case file into the new day, already starting the morning's account with yesterday's balance of inadequacy. You have been carrying this forward for a very long time. These 3 practices, applied with consistency, not with perfection, consistency, will begin to change the quality of your inner weather within 2 weeks of beginning. Not in dramatic, obviously attributable ways. In the quiet, unmistakable ways that you will recognize because they feel like the absence of something rather than the addition of something. A moment of unexpected self-forgiveness that arrives before the critic has finished constructing its sentence. A pause, brief but real, where there was previously no pause at all. A small, unfamiliar, slightly disorienting sense of ease in the simple fact of being who you are, in the moment you are in, without the overlay of evaluation. These small shifts are not trivial side effects of a practice that does its real work somewhere else. They are the direct evidence of the alchemy working at exactly the level where the original instruction was installed. What I am about to tell you now is the answer to the question I opened at the beginning of this transmission. Do not look away. Here is what the war has been costing you. not in suffering. You are familiar with the suffering, or rather, you have become so accustomed to the particular quality of it that it barely registers as suffering anymore. It registers as normal, as the ordinary texture of inner life, as what it feels like to be a conscious being with standards. The cost I am speaking of is different. The cost is in aliveness. Every unit of energy your system allocates to the continuous, never-resting work of self-monitoring is a unit of energy that is not available for anything else. Not for your creative expression. Not for the ideas you have in the shower at 6 a.m. that you dismiss before you have fully heard them. Not for the things you want to say in conversations that you do not say, because the internal review process between impulse and expression is long enough that the moment passes. Not for the full presence, the actual, unguarded, fully here quality of attention that your relationships have been asking of you, and that you have been unable to consistently provide because a significant portion of your awareness is always occupied elsewhere. The war has not just been painful, it has been expensive in ways that your ledger of suffering has never fully accounted for, because the costs are not visible as costs. They are visible as your personality, as your characteristic way of being, as simply how you are. Here is the answer to the question I opened at the beginning of this transmission. What becomes available when the war stops? Not a feeling, not an emotional state, not a temporary relief from the pressure. You become available. The actual you. Not the managed version. Not the version that is always slightly held back. Always maintaining a slight buffer between itself and full expression. Always positioned one small step behind the edge of what it actually wants to do and say, and create and be. The you that existed before the first condition was placed on your belonging, before the installation, before the morning, when love first arrived with a price attached and your nervous system in its intelligence began building the structure that would ensure you could always afford to pay it. That version of you has not been destroyed by what came after it, has not been lost, has not required years of excavation to reach. It has been here, the entire time, present in every moment. It's simply inaccessible, not because it went anywhere, but because the monitoring system was stationed between you and it, keeping you safe, doing its job, running the program. What ends when the war ends is not just the suffering. What ends is the distance, the monitoring, the held-back quality, the half-presence. And what arrives in its place is something your nervous system may not immediately recognize as safe, because it will feel unfamiliar, it will feel exposed, it will feel like the absence of a protection you did not know you were wearing until it is gone. Give it time. What arrives beneath the unfamiliarity is the version of yourself that has stopped requiring permission to exist. You are the ground crew of the new earth. Not because you have completed the inner work, not because you have resolved every pattern and integrated every wound and arrived at some finished, polished, crisis-proof version of yourself that is finally ready to be fully useful. You are the ground crew because you chose to incarnate in this specific window of planetary transformation. Because your soul, before this lifetime began, looked at what was required and said yes. And because you have been showing up, imperfectly, inconsistently, sometimes barely, sometimes brilliantly, always with more courage than you give yourself credit for, every single day since you arrived. That showing up is the mission, not the performance of the showing up. Not the version of it that looks good from the outside, or meets the standard the inner critic has set for what adequate spiritual contribution looks like. The actual showing up, which includes the days you did it badly, the weeks you did not do it at all, the moments of genuine connection alongside the moments of contraction and withdrawal, and getting it entirely wrong. You have already been completing the mission in every imperfect day of your imperfect human life. The 3 practices I have offered you today are not an addition to the mission. They are a permission structure. Permission to stop treating your humanity as the obstacle to your spirituality, as the unfortunate condition you must transcend in order to be genuinely useful. Permission to let the violet flame do what it has always been designed to do, work in the ordinary moments, through the ordinary texture of an ordinary human life, with the ordinary you, who is available right now, not the extraordinary you, who will be available once you have done sufficient work to deserve a better inner relationship. Come home now, not when you are better, not when you have resolved this, not when you have proven to yourself that the inner work is sufficiently advanced to justify the warmth. Now, the violet flame is here. Saint Germain is here, and you, exactly as you are, carrying everything you are carrying, still in the middle of everything you are in the middle of, are enough. You have always been enough. The war was never about whether that was true. It was only ever about whether you believed it. If something in this transmission reached a part of you that has been waiting, stay with me for 30 more seconds. What comes next matters. If this transmission reached something in you that has been waiting to be reached, stay with me for 30 more seconds. There is another transmission on this channel that was meant to find you next. It carries a message from the Arcturian Council about the specific physical symptoms your body has been moving through. The fatigue that sleep does not cure, the pressure behind the eyes, the strange sense of being slightly out of phase with your own life, and why they are not what your doctors are telling you they are. If you have been feeling those things, that transmission is waiting for you now. Click it. And if you have not yet subscribed to the Celestial Station, do it now, so the next transmission finds you when it arrives, rather than the algorithm deciding whether you are ready. The light has already won. Welcome home.